todo la inspiración o todo el trabajo que has desarrollado en este año sabático lo vas a presentar en el MAZ.
See, we'll show it all. Well, it's at MAZ. We'll show 13 paintings that I designed here, but they were created in my studio in New York, and I think they arrived today in Mexico City. Hopefully they will, but the difficult part is getting through the customs. So from Mexico City to here, it's no problem.
Sí.
And we're gonna show 3 installations that were created here, 2 sculptures that were created here, and 2 videos. One of them we created in New York, one of them we created here. So it's very much a summing up of the sabbatical kind of show. And the exhibition will be going on until March of 2026. So there's going to be plenty of time to actually see it.
Okay. En otros sabáticos has explorado el tema de las emociones, la felicidad. En este sabático, ¿qué exploraste?
El tiempo largo, about the long term. That's really the whole theme of the sabbatical.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but in, let's say, the last sabbatical was really about beauty. The one before was really about felicidad, about happiness. And then the one before was purely experimental, where the first one, I really didn't really start anything, but ultimately that whole series of things I've learned in my life so far ultimately came out of thinking of the first sabbatical.
Okay. ¿Y qué has aprendido de largo tiempo en este sabático? Siempre terminas como con una reflexión. Ya está por terminar el sabático. Me imagino que ya estás como cerrando lo aprendido.
Meaning, if I sum it up, that if I look at it from the long term, everything looks much better than from the short term. That the idea that everything is terrible, that the short-term news give to us, has terrible consequences. One example would be Donald Trump is only possible when a majority of people think everything is awful. Make America great again, this idea will only work if everybody believes things are terrible and they used to be very good. But when I ask Republican voters, when was it good? When was America great? Was it 10 years ago? Could not have been, because Obama was in place. Was it 20 years ago? Well, it was 9/11, the start of the Iraq and the Afghanistan war. Was it 50 years ago? Ronald Reagan ran with the exact same line, make America great again, 50 years ago. So the fact is that America was never great in the same way that the world was never great, because the world actually is much better now than it used to be 10, 20, 50, or 100 years ago. So I think those were some of the things that I've learned. I also really learned that even from a environmental point of view, many people will say, well, global warming didn't exist 100 years ago. But even from an environmental point of view, humanity really was never sustainable. This idea that the indigenous people or people 1,000 years ago lived in nature and loved nature is not quite correct. There were species that were eliminated all along the way. Neanderthals killed species. Our prehistoric forefathers killed complete species. The American Indians killed species. It just didn't matter that much because life was so terrible, because 50%, for most of humanity, 50% of all children died. If you broke your leg, you died. So we never really reached the numbers, and we never really reached a good life, and we never really were so many that it really mattered. But if you look at, well, if I look at the CO2 footprint of my grandmother who was incredibly frugal, didn't have a car, never went on a plane, but her CO2 footprint was double the size of mine because the stuff that they burned, wood and coal, was so inefficient that even though her life was much, much more frugal and much, much more simple, her CO2, basically what she added to the atmosphere in CO2, namely 10 tons on average, was double the size of ours, which is roughly 5 tons per year on average. So, or I can give you another example. We actually did create this exhibition in Ukraine during the war, in both in Lviv and in Kiev, and it was embraced almost more than in any other place in the world. And initially, I thought, you can't bring this theme to Ukraine because people who have bombs falling on their head wouldn't care about statistics that say now there are fewer people dying in wars than 50 years ago or 100 years ago, which of course is the case, but I was reluctant to bring that. There was a woman from Ukraine who heard me say that on a podcast in Germany, and she contacted me, and we did an initial small talk over Zoom for 80 people in Ukraine. And that talk that I only did under with the caveat that we would have a full hour of discussion afterwards was embraced so positively. There was somebody in the audience who said, let's bring the book to Ukraine, let's get it translated in Ukrainian. Somebody else said, let's bring the exhibition. I thought that this will never happen, but both of them happened. The book sold out immediately, is now in its third reprinting in Ukraine. The book called Now is Better, meaning this subject. And I found that when people have serious trouble in their life, like serious problems, they are much more thankful for a positive message than people who are actually doing really well. And so even in the case of war, the people who are in war are very much aware of the fact that as terrible as the Ukrainians have it, specifically the ones who live in the east of Ukraine at the front of the war with Russia, still are aware of the fact that right now significantly fewer people die in wars than in any other time in human history, because we just used to be much, much, much more violent. This is only partially true for Mexico. I think in Mexico right now, you do have a very high rate of violence. If I'm not mistaken, you have roughly about 40 homicides per year per 100,000 people, which compares to Ukraine, for example, to 60. So even though Mexico is not at war, you're somewhere in that world of a war-torn country. And it would compare to, let's say, if you look at the European rates of violence, it's somewhere in the 1700s, where Europe was at 40 homicides per year. And you would have to go further back to like 1500, to the Middle Ages, where Europe was at 60 or so. But in many European countries where I come from, Austria, it's one homicide per year per 100,000 people. Yeah.